Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. And thank you all so much for joining me for this episode. So this is a question and answer based podcast. If you have a question for me for the podcast about OCD recovery, about thoughts, about what treatment looks like, how to help your friend, your cousin, your mom, your brother, or any other relation that you may or may not have, or a question that is wildly inappropriate that feels dangerous or scary to ask, those are the ones I want to know about too. So send me a question over at either fearcastpodcast.com. You can go over there and send me a message there. You can also go over to Instagram. I'm Fearcast Podcast over there. It's one of the easier ways to ask me a question. You can just send me a DM over there. You can send me an audio question over there as well, which is often the fastest way to get your question up on the podcast. But record your voice, put it up there, give me whatever name you want me to use, provided it's reasonable, and I'll put it up on a future episode. So I'm going to have a question come up in the next couple of weeks about coming from a question from someone who messaged me over at Instagram. They wanted to know what they wanted to have me on or have somebody on to talk about the experience of being someone's partner in someone who has ROCD, so relationship OCD. They wanted to have someone on to speak from the partner's perspective, who is, doesn't have ROCD, but is, perhaps experiencing the brunt of it or experiencing the results of it. So I have someone lined up for that. I'll be really interested to see how that conversation goes. But so that will be coming up. So today's question is going to be coming from Rick. I'm going to jump into that in just a moment. But I'll just take this time to, again, thank everybody for listening to this podcast. As I mentioned last time, or the last episode, that we crossed the 7-year mark recently, or the last episode crossed the 7-year mark. And it's surprising that it is still going. I know it sounds like an odd question because I probably have like a year of backlogged questions, but it's an honor to be a part of your recovery journey for anybody who's listening to this, for anybody who is checking in on this podcast for information about OCD or just wants your question answered in some facet. Thank you all for letting me be a part of that in some small or big way, however it is for you. So one thing I wanted to mention as well, to shift a little bit, I tend to listen to podcasts as well. It's the reason I started this 7 years ago. It's like, well, how do I want to, put my mark out there or kind of participate in the broader body of information? I was like, I could look into like writing a book, but I go, I don't even want to write a book. Why would I want to read a book? Why would I write a book? So like podcast, I'll listen to podcasts. So one of the podcasts I listen to or started to listen to, here and there, is called the Curiously Caitlin podcast. It's a kind of an offshoot of the Holy Post podcast, which is started by Phil Vischer, who was one of the creators of VeggieTales. If you are in Christian land or have seen VeggieTales ever, it is a children's cartoon about spirituality, about God stuff, and about morality. Anyways, but it's singing and dancing vegetables. It's very weird. That's the best description I have, and I think that's the right description for it. So good luck if you've never seen it, but you can check it out. Either way, he does a podcast that I think is really good. It's relatively balanced. It's got a lot of great guests, a lot of information. So the Curiously Caitlin podcast, I think, is wonderful in the sense that the host is a doctoral candidate, at least she is at this point. I think she just defended her dissertation, but either way, she has this podcast where she asks kids questions about theology, and then she gets real heavy hitters to talk about those questions that kids are asking about faith. And what I love about that so much is that, and she puts it this way, and I think it's really important, and I'm going to get to the reason why I'm bringing it up. So if you're in Churchtown, there's this idea of we should have childlike faith. And what some people take that to mean is, we should, just believe stuff. right? Or we should, have a simple view of our faith. And I don't think that's really what that means. What she was talking about was, kids, if you've ever been around kids, they ask all sorts of ridiculous questions, like the most ridiculous possible questions that I don't even know how to begin to answer. I can't even describe the types of questions that my ridiculous children ask. I'll give you an idea about, and I know this is God stuff that I'm going to go into just in just a minute. And I promise, by the way, if you're new to this podcast, this is not a God-centric podcast. I just happen to bring stuff up, and I've done a faith series in the past, and that's an interest I have of mine. But no, it is not a religious podcast. But hear me out. So my kids will ask questions like this. Hey, Dad, so what happens if someone tried to shoot God? That's a question that one of my children had. And we're not like gun people. We're not like anti-gun people, but we're not like gun people. We don't bring up guns in the house, and we don't talk about them really. And my kids are at that age where everything's a gun and everything they want to shoot. So they have that question. I don't know how to answer that question. Do you? What happens if God? I don't know. I think you'd be in trouble. I think. All I know is like you'd be grounded, kid. If you tried to shoot God, you're grounded forever, probably. So don't do that. But these are the questions. But kids don't know you're not supposed to ask those questions, so they ask. Adults know better, so they don't ask these questions. We should be able to ask questions. We should be able to want to seek out information. Now, of course, on this podcast, we've talked about doubt and accepting doubt and all that stuff, but also we're allowed to ask questions. The compulsive question often is you've asked it, you've gotten the answer, but you keep asking the same question, hoping there's going to be a different answer. That's where it becomes compulsive. But why I bring this up? So most recently on the Curiously Caitlin podcast, she had Micah Erie on, who I've had on the podcast before to talk about faith stuff. And they had the question of, is it okay to doubt? What is the question? Is it wrong to doubt God? Was the question that they asked, that a child asked this question. And I think they did a fantastic job going into, is it wrong or is it okay to have doubts? And they kind of broadened it out to like, is it okay to have doubts in general about your faith? We've talked about before on this podcast that we as thinking people are going to have questions. And my position is real truth can survive scrutiny. We should be able to ask questions about our faith. We should be able to have doubts about our faith and to look into them, and that's okay, right? If you're a person of faith, your faith should be able to stand up to that scrutiny. If it doesn't, that's the problem, is the faith itself, not the question itself. So the reason I bring this up is that, first off, so go check that out if you are someone who's experiencing religious scrupulosity or having doubts and have that concern about whether or not you're sinning or doing something wrong because you have a question about something, or there's something that seems odd or off, or it doesn't seem to make sense, or your pastors or priests or imams or rabbis or whomever it seems weird and it feels like you can't ask that question. Check out that episode. I think it can be really helpful and really freeing to allow yourself to have that question. Now, for those who also have religious scrupulosity, note that there are some times when those questions can spiral unto themselves, right? And we've talked a lot about rumination and overthinking and overchecking, and that is a reality too. But if the question is, because I have these doubts, because I'm wondering, that must mean that it's bad, and that must mean that I'm sinning, and that's the reason I'm going to hell, or whatever flavor it is for you, check out that episode. I think it can be really helpful. All right, I'm done with my bit. Let's get into the real question, the question that came from Rick. And guys, this is I think this might be the shortest question I've ever answered on this podcast. I think in the box that's going to be over here, I don't even think it's going to scroll. I think it's just going to be a box. Rick, you know how to answer. You know how to ask a question. All right, here's Rick's question. They say, is it normal to think about thoughts on purpose, or at least I think so. They say, it seems that when I have moments of greater calm, the brain thinks about thoughts on purpose. That's it. That's their question. The box is gone. How fast was... So fast that I could have all this time to yammer on about someone else's podcast. Anyways. All right. So, Rick, this is a great question because this topic or topics like this show up a lot in my practice, and I hear other people talk about it as well, right? Am I thinking my thought, or is it an intrusive thought? There can even be this awareness, and this comes out around in kind of hyper-awareness, this hyper-awareness of the fact that you're thinking, and that you're hyper-focused on the thinking. And and then the question comes in, am I thinking normally? Is this right? Am I thinking too much? Not enough? Is this the way that other people think, right? It's very akin to that, that obsession about breathing or blinking. Am I breathing too much? Am I breathing too heavy? Too hard? Am I swallowing too hard? Am I not swallowing hard enough? Am I blinking in a weird way? How do other people blink? What do they do? What's that person over there doing? And again, going through the cycle as this thing stuck in your craw, is this weird and normal? And now it gets into, is this distraction, this question, this wondering, this doubt, this awareness going to be there forever? Anyways, but to Rick's question, is it normal to think about thoughts on purpose? And he says, or at least I think so. So at least I think they're on purpose. And that's an important bit. I talk to folks who have this doubt about whether or not, am I thinking this thought? Am I thinking this thought? I recognize the thought is there, but are they thinking it? And this is how I'm interpreting your question, Rick, and I'll try to elaborate on this as much as I can. But this is all right, am I thinking this on purpose? For some, there can be this question about whether or not the thought that they're having, the obsession, the intrusive image, the feeling, the question, the statement, the ruminative pattern, the thought process, whatever it is, are they thinking it on purpose, or is it just a thought that's kind of just there, right? It's a big difference, and a lot of people can go down the rabbit hole with this to try to get to the answer, because for a lot of folks, the answer is incredibly important, necessary, vital to get to the bottom of, or else. And that question for a lot of folks hinges on, I'll answer that question. It hinges on guilt and responsibility. There are going to be caveats out there, and if you're that one person screaming into your iPod, people still listen to iPods. Your magical box that makes sounds. Anyways, it's guilt and responsibility. If I thought this, I'm responsible for it. There's some thought-action fusion in that. But if it's not me, well, I'm off the hook, right? You hear this a lot with scrupulosity, right? Religious questions, moral questions, maybe some violent or more of those taboo thoughts, maybe some of those sexual thoughts, right? If I'm thinking it, well, that means I'm a pervert. That means I'm bad. That means I'm gross. That means I am sinful or doubting or offensive, right? Or racist or sexist or fill in the blank with an ist, right? But if it's just a thought that I have, it's fine. Right? Because we talk about thoughts are just thoughts, and you aren't your thoughts. They're names of books. You aren't your thoughts. We talk about an act. We can accept the presence of thoughts because the thoughts are not who we are. They're just stuff that pops into our head. Great. I can let go of that because that's not my responsibility. I didn't do it on purpose. Right? So you go on to say, it seems that when I have moments of greater calm, the brain thinks about thoughts on purpose. Okay. So this is to a certain degree where I really wanted to get into this. Okay, so we as people have thoughts. I hate to surprise you about this, but we've got all sorts of thoughts. Our brain is a thinking machine, okay? Its full-time job is to come up with thoughts. Random thoughts, weird thoughts, put these connections together. What's that weird thing over there? What's that thing from 5th grade that you wanted to think about? Remember that thing that person said in college that just stuck in your craw? Well, that sounded like that person that one thing said yesterday. Well, let's put those things together and compare the situations. Your brain does these things in a weird and wonderful and wild way. And that is a wonderful thing, except when it's not, right? Okay. So our brain is endlessly creative in a wonderful way in that it can take thought, 2 thoughts, 5 thoughts, a million thoughts that don't make any sense together, put them together, give them to you as something that is novel and new to you. And sometimes that novel thought is really scary or feels threatening or feels bad and dangerous in some sort of way. Your brain is constantly doing this. But the vast majority of thoughts, and I can make up statistics, 93.2%, from that most recent study, that is the percentage of thoughts that we have that make no stinking sense to our moment and that we forget anyways. And they're those really quick thoughts, the ones that just snap into your head for a moment there and then just drift away and they're gone forever. And then there are some of those thoughts that are important. And some of those thoughts we grab onto because they might be that reminder of that thing we're supposed to do later today. They might be a great idea of the thing you're supposed to get or you should get your boyfriend, girlfriend for their birthday, right? That would be a great idea to get them that. Thanks, brain. You're really looking out for me. Some thoughts are going to be helpful, but the vast majority of thoughts are going to be useless. When we're focused on something, our attention is going towards that. We are putting energy towards that thought, and that, for the most part, gets the lion's share of what's going on in our head. So that's what we're focused on. But you said when you've got moments of greater calm, so when there's nothing going on, your brain starts to think thoughts. Yeah, meaning that I'm willing to bet you still have thoughts. It's just that when you have downtime, now you're more aware of those thoughts that were already there in the first place. But again, think thoughts on purpose. I think you're applying that responsibility component to it. And I wonder if you're conflating intrusive thought to on-purpose thought, to an intentional thought. And that's an important distinction. The idea that, we're trying, that we're like, for some people, I'll phrase it in this way. There are going to be a great number of people out there who are doing everything they can to avoid the possibility that the brain will give them an unwanted thought, right? I'm not going to say it's a bad thought. I'm just going to say it's an unwanted thought because your brain doesn't know it's a bad thought. It just knows it's a thought. But you know that that's not one that you really asked for. You didn't seek it out. It just popped up. Right? So when there are a lot of people who are going to try to avoid those thoughts as best they can. You'll see people, just going headlong into their work, becoming workaholics, because if they're constantly working, they don't have a chance to experience an unwanted, intrusive thought. Right? There'll be people who resort to drugs and alcohol to shut down their brain as best they possibly can, right? There are folks who are just going to be constantly trying to be distracted by something so that they don't have to have those unwanted intrusive thoughts. Some of the teachers I work with, they dread summer and winter break. Why? Well, because that's couple of months out of the year that they have no real responsibilities. I mean, for the most part, right? They don't have the work and the school and the student responsibilities. So that's unfettered thinking time. That's unfettered time for their brain to just go bonkers with stuff that could just go through their brain. Whereas the rest of the school year, they've got to be focused. They're in the class. They're teaching the thing. They're doing whatever it is that they do in the school program. You get the idea. You get what I'm saying? So, but Rick, I had this question too. So here's what I did. I did the thing I tell people not to do. I went to the Google box. I'm going to pull it up. So I just typed in types of thoughts, right? What types of thoughts do people have? Well, AI overview for the Google box had an answer for me. And man, it is confusing. So I'll just read what it says. All right. So it tries to break it down and summarize stuff from all sorts of things all over the internet. And I did not read every single thing. I'm going to be honest, but do you anyways? No one does. All right. So here's what it said. And I tend to not use AI for a lot of reasons. I'm looking at you, Kimberly Quinlan. She gave me sass about that recently. But that's a fight that she and I will fight over time. In fact, I will text her about that and I will tell her the AI Google bot is mean? All right, so here's what it says. So it breaks it down. Here are some thoughts. Categorizing thoughts by content. So it gives positive thoughts, thoughts that evoke feelings of joy and happiness. Negative thoughts, thoughts that evoke feelings of sadness and fear and anger. Neutral thoughts, thoughts that are neither particularly positive nor negative. Intrusive thoughts, thoughts that are unwanted, distressing, and often repetitive. I will disagree with that. Automatic thoughts, quick, often unconscious thoughts that arise in response to a situation, and then it goes into core beliefs. All right, fine. Then it goes into categorizing thoughts by cognitive function, creative thinking, generating new ideas, critical thinking, analyzing information objectively that makes reasoned judgments, analytical thinking, breaking down complex information into smaller parts to understand it better. And then it's like abstract thinking, concrete thinking, convergent thinking, divergent thinking, reflective thinking, all right, all sorts of stuff. It goes into categorizing thoughts by process, automatic thoughts, intermediate beliefs. So it says these are rules, assumptions, and attitudes that develop from core beliefs. And then it says core beliefs, which are fundamental, deeply held beliefs about oneself and the world. Man, I can understand the anxiety and the stress that may come from this. Man, if you're going, oh my God, what kind of thoughts do I have? Let me go to the internets. Let me see what they have to say. You could go down the rabbit hole and go, oh my gosh, I've got all sorts of thoughts, all sorts of types of thoughts. I got an idea. Let me spend the next 15 hours today trying to evaluate and to question and to consider and to get to the bottom of exactly what type of thought this one is, so I can know that it's a good one, a bad one, the right one, a wrong one, a sinful one, an appropriate one, a healthy thought for me, a spiritually relevant and important thought for me. You get the idea. I work with people. I'm sure there are people out there who are struggling with this, who are in their head about, should I be thinking this? Is this good? Is this bad? Is this right? Is this wrong? And trying to know for sure. And it's a never-ending battle. It's a never-ending battle. So here's what I wanted to do. I want to break this up and to make this a little bit easier. And I have 4 categories. 4 categories that are ultimately 2 categories broken down into 2 options underneath. Okay? So here's what we're looking at. Here's what I would say are the most important thoughts. So are we thinking thoughts on purpose? Rick, here's what I have to say about that. I think more importantly is that we've got all sorts of thoughts, and that I want to break it down into, are you having in this moment an intentional thought or an intrusive thought? Okay? Now, an intentional thought is a thought that you're devoting energy to. You're going out of your way to intentionally think about something. Now, this can be for good reasons or bad reasons, but you are noticeably, tangibly directing cognitive and psychic energy toward something. You're figuring something out, you're elaborating on something, you're analyzing something, you're reviewing something, you are scouring something, you are elaborating on. I don't know if I already said that. You get the idea. You're putting energy towards something and for a purpose, for some reason, right? Because it's fun, because it's scary, because you're trying to get relief, because you're trying to understand something, because you're trying to avoid something, right? But those are intentional thoughts you're putting energy towards. Contrast that with intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts, you're not putting any energy towards them. They just show up. I know right now in the interwebs, it is popular to say the intrusive thoughts won, so therefore you did something ridiculous. All right, so intrusive thoughts isn't a bad thought in and of itself, which I think is what the implication of the intrusive thoughts won. We can have good and positive intrusive thoughts. Remember that creative component, right? The creative thinking that I mentioned or that the internet's told me about. We can have good, positive, desired, wanted, intrusive thoughts. It's that thought that just randomly shows up again about that gift that you should buy somebody. You're having a conversation, you're in a meeting, you're in class. All of a sudden you go, Pokemon, I should get Pokemon cards for that person. I don't know. We are eyeballs deep in Pokemon around the Foss house. The kids have discovered Pokemon, and it's going crazy. I don't even know what to do with them. I don't understand. I get it. I get it. I just never did it. So I know like Pikachu and that's it. So I'm learning a lot, and my daughter knows everything about Pokemon. I'm not even mad. She will sit and read a book, like a thick one, all about every Pokemon and what they do and their skills and their history and their powers and all and what evolves into what. I'm impressed. I'm super impressed with her. You got to know. If you're listening to this in the future, kid, well done. I wish I had that dedication to anything. Anyways, so you can have good intrusive thoughts. You can have unwanted and scary and bad intrusive thoughts. And this is usually the OCD kind. All right. But they're not good or bad. They're just, am I giving energy? So here's what I want Rick and all y'all to think about. Am I giving energy towards this thought, or is this one just popping up, right? There can be a bit of a halvesy in that a thought can pop up and that we can then give it the energy, right? Now, Greenberg talks about this. So if you want to go back and listen to Michael Greenberg's stuff on this, go check him out. He's got a lot of great information and a lot of great caveats on this, and you can go read his articles. So he talks about a thought that pops into our awareness. It's just into our awareness. And he says they're usually pretty abstract and not complete and all that stuff. They're kind of fuzzy around the edges. And then we give them energy, and that expands on them and crystallizes and clarifies it, right? So, but that's giving it energy, and that can mature then into rumination the more you go down that rabbit hole, okay? So that's one. The other is this thought egosyntonic or ego-dystonic, okay? So is this thought syntonic? Is this consistent with who I am, who I'm trying to be, who I want to be, who I'm working towards, my values, my morals? Is it consistent with that? Or is it ego-dystonic? Right? Is this against who I am? Is this unraveling? Is it not unraveling? That's going to be misconstrued by somebody. I'm getting an email. Is this against who I would like my character to be, who I want to be known as? Right? So the dystonic thoughts, we sometimes call them bad thoughts, right? But you can intentionally have an ego-dystonic thought for a lot of different reasons, right? You can say, well, I'm having a thought right now that isn't who I am, but I'm going to engage with it because of a whole other reason, right? So is it a bad thought that you're intentionally thinking about? Are all intrusive thoughts ego-dystonic and wrong and bad? No, we've just talked about that. So where we can have this, so we can break it up into this, Rick, where you're saying, all right, is it normal to think about thoughts on purpose? Yeah, it is. It is. It's normal to think about thoughts on purpose. It's normal to think thoughts not on purpose, on accident, right? That's kind of the way our brain works. When we separate it into this idea of all good thoughts are on purpose and all bad thoughts are on accident, it's a faulty way to view our brain. Instead, we want to take the position that we have thoughts, and that thoughts are just thoughts. Some we give attention to, some we do not. Some are desired, and some are not. But our brain doesn't care about any of that. It is you and your core sense of self, this majestic, mystical thing that is you, that makes that judgment call. Now, when I have moments of greater calm, the brain thinks about thoughts on purpose. Guess what? The brain is also thinking about thoughts on purpose thoughts on purpose and thoughts on accident when you're super freaking busy too. As we are talking here on this here podcast, I am also thinking about other stuff that I have to do. My brain goes, hey, you really have to watch those videos to figure out the software to that recording hardware that you just bought. Or, hey, I wonder how I can, finagle this, music gear later. I think about music gear most of the time. It's either OCD or music stuff. It used to be archery stuff all the time, but it was also about how do I figure out how to get archery gear. It's a long conversation. Anyways, so Rick, what I would encourage you to do is to take a position of accepting of the thoughts that you're having, not trying to rigidly put them into these good or bad or right or wrong categories, but instead to say, am I having thoughts right now? And when there's this urge to go down this rabbit hole of, am I having the right thought Am I having the wrong thought? Or am I intentionally thinking about this thought, or am I not? Now, I want you to trust that if you are 100% confident that, yeah, you are intentionally thinking about this thought, own it. You are thinking this thought. Okay, you are. So what? You're a thinking person, Rick. Everyone out there is a thinking person, I hope. And a coughing person. And we're going to have those thoughts. But if it's related to the moral component, if it's related to your goodness or badness or rightness or wrongness, we're letting go of that. If you're owning it, own it. And if it's one that you feel bad about, apologize for it if you need to. But if the question is, is this one that I'm kind of thinking about or not really thinking about? Is this intrusive or not? Let go of it. Let yourself off the hook for that one. It's not worth it to go down that rabbit hole because you're never going to get to a satisfactory answer. Instead, say, I had a thought. Yep. Thanks, brain, for doing what you do. Thanks, brain, for thinking and doing what you do so stinking well. I mean, you can get on board with some better thoughts, brain, but you know what? You're doing your best. Thanks. And then move on. There's going to be this pull and this urge to go back and review and to question and to scrutinize. That is the task then, is to acknowledge that there's the thought and to shift away from that and accept the uncertainty that maybe there was a right percentage or a wrong percentage, or maybe you're going to misunderstand it and miss something, or maybe you did make a mistake and you get the idea. And we're going, I don't know. Because unless you're 100% certain, it is going to be a rabbit hole that is going to lead to rumination and giving undue attention towards something that I know you don't really care about anyways in the first place. Okay? So similar with the ego syntonic and dystonic. Sometimes our brain is going to think syntonic thoughts and sometimes it's going to think dystonic thoughts. And our job is instead to say, them's theirs thoughts. That's it. And now that I notice that them's theirs thoughts, what do I want to do with it? The answer can be nothing, by the way. And nothing is a great thing to do with thoughts. Nothing is a great thing to do with a lot of things. At the end of the day, I believe this is what Michael Greenberg is arguing for. You don't have to think about anything. You have no requirement to think about that thought. You have no requirement to analyze whether or not you are thinking that thought on purpose or whether or not it's intrusive and just a product of your brain. You don't have to do anything. Rick, you're absolved. You're off the hook. You don't have to do it. And I'd encourage you not to. We go, that was a thought. Okay. Do I want to do anything about it or no? If the answer is no, then let yourself move on and then let yourself free of that responsibility to go back and to relitigate it or to jump down the rabbit hole of whether or not it's the right thing to do. It's easier said than done, and is a practice and it's a discipline. But part of that is acknowledging that it's a thought in the first place, acknowledging that we have human brains that do things and they exist just between our ears. Having a thought does not increase the chances of it happening. It doesn't decrease the chances of it happening. Having the thought is just the thought in and of itself. And then we move on to the things that we want to give our energy towards, where we want to give intentional focus towards. So what are those things for you, Rick? What do you want to think about? In the process of you pursuing the thoughts that you want to think about, you will have thoughts that you don't want to think about. There will be ego dystonic. There will be ego syntonic. There will be unintentional, and there will be intentional too. And then sometimes that unintentional thought, the intrusive one, will start getting attention. And then you're going to go, it's not what I want to do. We shake it off and we go, all right, what's the next thing? What's the thing that I do want to think about? And I'm going to focus on that as best I can. And when you get distracted, you go, yep, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to refocus back on that because that's my job right now. I'm going to let go of this urge to review it and to fix it and to solve it. So, Rick, I hope I answered your question effectively. I hope I didn't go off the rails too much. And I hope I got to a little bit of what you were asking. And to everybody else out there, hopefully this was helpful in helping you rethink or think differently about the thoughts that you're having. So, all right, everybody, until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.